Emily Carter stood in the executive boardroom for the second time in her life. The first time, she'd been fired, humiliated in front of the entire senior leadership team for trying to save the company from disaster. Now, 6 months later, she was back in that same room, but everything had changed. The nameplate on the desk in front of her read, Operations Director. The man who destroyed her career sat across from her, his face unreadable. But Emily had learned something in those 6 months. Sometimes the people who break you are the ones who need you most.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Emily Carter had perfected the art of being invisible. For 7 years, she'd sat at the reception desk of Henderson Manufacturing, greeting visitors with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, answering phones with practiced efficiency, and watching the parade of executives stride past her without a second glance. She was furniture to them, functional, unremarkable, and easily replaced. The lobby of Henderson Manufacturing was her kingdom, though no one would ever call it that. The marble floors gleamed under her care. She arrived 30 minutes early every morning to brew the coffee just right, dark roast for the executives, medium for the managers, and she always kept herbal tea stocked for Patricia from accounting, who was pregnant with her third child. Emily knew everyone's names, their coffee orders, their children's birthdays, and their small complaints about the parking lot or the temperature control. She listened to all of it, filed it away in her mind, and was forgotten the moment they stepped into the elevator. Richard Henderson III, CEO and heir to the Henderson family fortune, was perhaps the worst of them all. In 7 years, he'd spoken directly to Emily maybe 20 times, and never with any warmth. To him, she was a voice on the intercom, a hand that delivered his messages, a blur in his peripheral vision as he swept through the lobby each morning in his $1,000 suits. He had inherited the company from his father, who had inherited it from his father, and he ran it with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never had to fight for anything in his life. But Emily fought every day. She fought to remember that this job paid her rent, covered her mother's medical bills, and kept food on her table. She fought against the small indignities, the executives who snapped their fingers at her, the visitors who spoke to her like she was stupid, the corporate events where she served drinks and was never invited to actually attend. She fought to maintain her dignity in a place that seemed designed to strip it away. David Park was different. The operations manager was one of the few people who actually saw Emily as a person. He'd stop at her desk in the mornings, ask about her weekend, remember that her mother had been sick. David had worked his way up from the factory floor 20 years ago, and he never forgot where he came from. Emily appreciated that about him, even if his kindness couldn't change the fundamental reality of her position in the company hierarchy. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Emily arrived at 6:30, disabled the alarm system, and began her routine. Coffee brewing, lobby lights adjusted, fresh flowers arranged in the vase by the entrance, a detail she paid for herself because it made the space feel more welcoming. She logged into her computer and began reviewing the day's schedule. That's when she saw it. Her screen showed the executive calendar, which she monitored to know when to expect important visitors. Today's schedule showed a relatively light day, a few internal meetings, nothing major. But when Emily opened her email to clear out the overnight messages, she found a confirmation that made her blood run cold. The Yamamoto delegation from Tokyo was arriving today. Not tomorrow, as the calendar showed. Today. In exactly 7 hours. Emily's hands trembled as she cross-referenced the email thread. The meeting had been scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. Someone had entered it into the system as Wednesday. It was a simple mistake, the kind that happened in large organizations. But this wasn't a simple meeting. Yamamoto Industrial was the Henderson Manufacturing's largest potential client. A deal that David had mentioned was worth over $2 million. the kind of deal that could define the company's next 5 years. And no one knew they were coming today. Emily immediately tried calling Richard's executive assistant, but it went to voicemail. She tried David Park's line, no answer. She sent urgent emails marked high priority, but she knew from experience that executives didn't check emails first thing in the morning. They expected her to filter the important from the mundane. This was important. This was critical. Emily made a decision that she would later realize was both the bravest and foolishest thing she'd had ever done. She left her desk, something receptionists were never supposed to do during business hours, and took the elevator to the executive floor. The 5th floor was a different world. Thick carpet replaced marble tile, original artwork hung on walls painted in muted, sophisticated colors. The air even smelled different, less like industrial cleaner and more like expensive cologne and furniture polish. Emily had only been up here twice before, once during her initial interview 7 years ago, and once to deliver an urgent package that couldn't wait. She found the executive boardroom where Richard held his morning strategy meeting every Tuesday. Through the frosted glass, she could see silhouettes. At least 8 people. David Park was there, so were the vice presidents of sales, finance, and production. And at the head of the table, Richard Henderson's unmistakable profile. She knocked, softly at first, then more firmly when no one responded. The door opened and Richard's assistant, Marcus, looked at her with confusion and irritation. "The meeting's not to be disturbed," he said tersely. "I know, I'm sorry, but this is urgent. The Yamamoto delegation, whatever it is, send an email." "I did, but no one's seen it yet. They're arriving today, not tomorrow, in 2 hours. The calendar was wrong and we're not prepared." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. Before he could respond, Richard's voice cut through from inside the room. "Who's interrupting this meeting?" Marcus hesitated, and Emily made another decision. She stepped past him into the boardroom. 8 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her. Emily felt like she'd walked onto a stage without knowing her lines. David Tark looked surprised, but not unkind. The VPs looked annoyed, and Richard Henderson looked at her as if she were an insect that had somehow crawled onto his conference table. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Henderson," Emily began, her voice steadier than she felt. "But there's been a scheduling error with the Yamamoto meeting. They're arriving today at 2 p.m., not tomorrow. I've tried to reach—" "Stop." Richard's voice was cold, clipped. He stood slowly, his 6'2" frame seeming to loom even across the room. "You're the receptionist, correct?" "Yes, sir, Emily Carter. I've worked here for 7 years and 7 years and you've never learned the chain of command. You don't enter executive meetings. You don't bypass the proper channels. You certainly don't burst in here creating panic over what is most likely your own misreading of a calendar entry. Sir, I have the email confirmation. If you would just—" "I don't need to look at anything except the door you're about to walk through." Richard turned to Marcus. "Why is she still here?"
Emily felt her face burning. David Park half rose from his seat. "Richard, maybe we should—" "Stay out of this, David." Richard turned back to Emily, and his eyes were chips of ice. "Let me be very clear, Miss Carter. I don't know what delusions of importance you've developed sitting at that desk, but you are not an executive. You are not a manager. You are a receptionist. Your job is to answer phones and smile at visitors. That's it. You don't make judgment calls about scheduling. You don't interrupt meetings. And you certainly don't waste the time of the 8 most important people in this company." The room was absolutely silent. Emily could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "This company was built by my grandfather, grown by my father, and entrusted to me. Every person in this room has earned their place here through years of education, experience, and results. You answer phones." He said it with such contempt that Emily felt something inside her crack. "And apparently you can't even do that without creating drama." "I was trying to help." "You're fired." The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily stopped breathing. "Effective immediately," Richard continued, his tone now bored, as if he'd already moved on mentally. "Marcus, have HR process her termination and security escort her out. Make sure she doesn't take anything that belongs to the company." He waved his hand dismissively. "Now, can we please get back to actual business?" Emily stood frozen for a moment that felt like an hour. She looked at David Park, who looked stricken but said nothing. She looked at the other executives, who avoided her gaze. And she looked at Richard Henderson, who had already turned his back to her and was returning to his seat. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw his arrogance back in his face, to tell him about every small thing she'd done over 7 years that had kept his company running smoothly. She wanted to cry, to break down right there and show him the human cost of his casual cruelty. Instead, Emily straightened her spine, took a deep breath, and spoke with a calmness that surprised even herself. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here, Mr. Henderson. I hope you have a good day." She turned and walked out of the boardroom with her head high, even as her tears blurred her vision. She could feel their eyes on her back, David sympathetic, the others relieved that the awkwardness was over. Marcus followed her to the elevator and rode down with her in excruciating silence. When they reached the lobby, her lobby, Emily went to her desk and began gathering her few personal items: a photo of her mother, a small plant she'd been nursing for 3 years, a coffee mug with a faded motivational quote. Her hands shook as she placed them in her purse. Marcus cleared his throat. "I'll need your ID badge and keys." Emily unclipped the badge she'd worn every day for 7 years and placed it on the desk. The keys followed with a small click. She looked around the lobby one last time, the space that she'd kept immaculate, the flowers that she'd bought that morning, the coffee pot that would overflow in an hour if someone didn't turn it off. "The coffee timer needs to be reset by 8:30, she told Marcus quietly, "and the Yamamoto delegation will need an interpreter. We've used Kenji Matsuda before. His number is in the vendor database under translation services. The meeting room on 5 needs to be set up with tea service, not coffee. Japanese clients prefer tea. And there are 3 boxes of promotional materials in the storage closet that need to be brought up." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Emily, I know. I'm just telling you so they're prepared." She picked up her purse and took one last look at the desk that had been her post for 7 years. "Goodbye, Marcus." She walked toward the front door, ready to leave Henderson Manufacturing forever. But as she reached the handle, she stopped. The Yamamoto delegation would arrive in 6.5 hours to a company that didn't know they were coming. David Park had worked on this deal for 18 months. The factory workers whose jobs would be secured by this contract had families to feed. This wasn't about Richard Henderson or his cruelty or even her own humiliation. This was about doing the right thing even when no one would thank her for it. Emily turned around and went back to the desk that was no longer hers. She logged into the computer with the credentials that would probably be deactivated within an hour, and she began making phone calls.
Emily worked with the frantic efficiency of someone who knew her time was limited. The computer system hadn't locked her out yet, a small miracle of bureaucratic slowness. She pulled up the Yamamoto file and began reading everything she could find. The deal was even bigger than she'd thought. Yamamoto Industrial was considering Henderson Manufacturing as their exclusive North American supplier for precision automotive components. The contract was valued at $2.3 million in the first year alone, with projections of growth to $5 million annually within 3 years. For a company the size of Henderson Manufacturing, this wasn't just a good deal, it was transformative. David Park's notes were meticulous. The Yamamoto delegation consisted of 3 people: Hiroshi Yamamoto himself, the CEO, his daughter Akiko Yamamoto, who ran their international expansion division, and their technical director, Kenji Tanaka. They were traditional in business practices but forward-thinking in technology. They valued precision, respect, and long-term relationships over flashy presentations. Emily's mind raced. She picked up the phone and dialed the first number. Matsuda Translation Services. "Mr. Matsuda, this is Emily Carter from Henderson Manufacturing. I know this is incredibly short notice, but we need an interpreter for a meeting today at 2 p.m. I know you worked with us on the Kawasaki project last year." "Today? Emily, I have a commitment at the university until 3. "I understand, and I apologize. Is there anyone else you could recommend? Someone who understands technical manufacturing terminology and business protocols?" There was a pause. My associate, Yuki Tanaka, might be available. Let me call her and get back to you within the hour. Thank you. I'll be at... She stopped. She didn't have a desk anymore. She gave him her cell phone number instead. Next, she called the catering company Henderson Manufacturing used for important clients. She ordered a traditional tea service, light Japanese-style appetizers, and made sure they understood the cultural importance of presentation. The cost would go on the company credit card, which they'd probably dispute later, but she'd deal with that problem if it came. Then she accessed the shared drive where all presentation materials were stored. David's Yamamoto presentation was there, but it was clearly still in draft form. She downloaded it, opened it on her computer, and began formatting and polishing. She fixed typos, aligned graphics, and made sure every slide was crisp and professional. She printed 3 copies on the color laser printer, the good one that was normally reserved for executive use, and placed them in Henderson Manufacturing's premium presentation folders. She was sliding the last folder together when she heard footsteps behind her. "What are you doing?" Emily turned to find David Park standing there, his expression confused and concerned. She glanced at the clock. It had been 20 minutes since her firing. The executive meeting must have ended. "I'm preparing for the Yamamoto meeting," she said simply. "Emily, you were..." David struggled with the words. "Richard shouldn't have done that. The way he spoke to you was inexcusable. I should have said something." "But you didn't." The words came out more bitter than she intended. She softened her tone. "I'm not angry at you, David. I know how Richard is. But I am angry that I'm being treated like I'm the problem when I was trying to prevent one. You're not the problem. And you were right. The Yamamoto delegation is coming today. I checked the emails after you left. Richard's assistant is scrambling now." David looked at the presentation folders on the desk. "Emily, you don't have to do this. You don't work here anymore." "I know." Emily saved the file and logged out of the computer. "But you do. And those factory workers on the floor who will benefit from this contract, they still work here too. This isn't about Richard Henderson or me. It's about doing what's right." David was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a sad, appreciative smile. 7 years I've worked with you, and I never really saw you. None of us did. I'm sorry for that. Everyone's sorry after the damage is done. Emily picked up the presentation folders and handed them to David. "The tea service is being delivered at 1:30. Make sure they set it up in conference room A. It has the best view and the natural light that will photograph well for their social media. Yuki Tanaka from Matsuda Translation might be your interpreter. She'll call my cell phone if she can make it. The presentation materials are printed. David, in slide 12, there's a production capacity estimate that's outdated. It still shows 50,000 units per month, but I know you upgraded the factory line last quarter. The actual capacity is 75,000. David looked down at the folders in his hands, then back at Emily. "How did you know that?" "Because I listen. Because I pay attention to every conversation that happens in this lobby. Because in 7 years, I've learned more about this company than most of the executives will ever know." Emily picked up her purse. "Good luck with the meeting." She walked toward the door again, but David's voice stopped her. "Emily, wait. Come with me. I don't think Richard wants to see me again." "I'm not asking Richard. I'm asking you." David's voice was firm. "You know this deal better than anyone now. You know what needs to happen. I want you in that meeting." "Emily, I was fired. You were fired unjustly, impulsively, and stupidly. Richard makes about 5 decisions a year that he later regrets. This will be one of them. Check his watch. We have 6 hours. Stay, please, not for Richard, for the company, for yourself. Show him what he threw away." Emily wanted to leave. She wanted to walk out with her dignity intact, to never see Richard Henderson's contemptuous face again. But a part of her, the part that had spent 7 years being invisible, wanted something else. She wanted to be seen. "I'll stay until the meeting is over," she said finally, "but I'm not doing this for Richard. I'm doing it for you." The next 6 hours were chaos orchestrated. Emily couldn't sit at the reception desk. Her credentials were deactivated, and security had been notified of her termination. Instead, she worked from a small office that David had cleared for her, coordinating every detail of the Yamamoto visit from behind the scenes like a theater director managing a production. Yuki Tanaka called back. She could make it, but she'd arrive only 15 minutes before the meeting. Emily walked her through everything she needed to know about the deal, the participants, and the cultural considerations. The catering service called with a problem. They were short on the specific Japanese tea blend Emily had requested. She spent 20 minutes on the phone tracking down an Asian specialty store that could deliver it in time. Marcus, Richard's assistant, appeared in her doorway at noon looking flustered. "I don't know how you're still in the building, but Richard wants you escorted out immediately. Tell Richard that if I leave now, his meeting will fall apart." Emily didn't look up from her computer, where she was creating name cards in both English and Japanese for the conference table. "Tell him that when the Yamamoto delegation arrives and everything runs smoothly, he can thank me by letting me stay long enough to see it finished. If it goes badly, I'll leave on my own."
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Marcus looked uncertain. He's not going to like that. He doesn't have to like it. He just has to be smart enough to accept help when it's offered. Marcus disappeared, and Emily half expected security to arrive and physically remove her. Instead, there was silence. She took it as grudging permission. At 1:15, the tea service arrived. Emily supervised the setup personally, showing the catering staff exactly how to arrange the cups, how to position the teapot, where to place the small sweets that traditionally accompanied tea service. She learned all of this from books and YouTube videos years ago, filed away as potentially useful knowledge. Now it was proving invaluable. At 1:30, Yuki Tanaka arrived, a professional woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner. Emily briefed her quickly, provided her with a copy of the presentation materials so she could prepare mentally for the technical terminology, and showed her where she'd be seated in the conference room. At 1:45, David gathered the team for final preparations. Richard was there, along with the VPs of sales and production and the company's legal counsel. Richard's eyes landed on Emily, standing in the back of the conference room, and his expression darkened. What is she doing here? She's here because every single thing that's ready for this meeting exists because of her, David said calmly, but firmly. The interpreter, the tea service, the corrected presentation materials, the meeting prep, all Emily. I gave clear instructions, and I made an executive decision. You can fire me after the meeting if you want, but right now, we have the most important meeting of the year arriving in 10 minutes, and the only reason we're prepared is because Emily refused to let your ego destroy this deal. The room was silent. Emily watched Richard's face cycle through anger, calculation, and finally cold pragmatism. He turned away from her without another word. "Let's just get through this," he muttered. At exactly 2 p.m., the Yamamoto delegation entered the building. Emily watched from the lobby her old station as Hiroshi Yamamoto, his daughter Akiko, and Kenji Tanaka came through the door. They were impeccably dressed, formal and observant. Their eyes took in every detail of the space. David greeted them with appropriate bows, which they returned. Yuki Tanaka introduced herself and smoothly transitioned into her role as interpreter. The group was escorted to the elevator, and Emily saw Akiko Yamamoto notice the flower arrangement, the one Emily had bought that morning. She said something in Japanese to her father, who nodded and smiled slightly. Yuki translated quietly to David. She says the flowers are beautiful, very welcoming. When the elevator doors closed, Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. She'd done everything she could. The rest was up to David and the team. She waited in the small office David had given her, watching the clock, imagining how the meeting was progressing. She'd worked so hard to make this happen, and now she couldn't even be in the room to see it. At 3:30, her cell phone buzzed. A text from David. "They're asking for you."
Emily's heart stopped. Asking for her? Why? Had something gone wrong? She took the elevator to the 5th floor and walked to conference room A. Through the frosted glass, she could see the meeting was still in progress. David stepped out to meet her. Akiko Yamamoto asked about the person who arranged the tea service and the flower arrangement. She said whoever did it understood Japanese business culture very well. I told her it was you. She wants to meet you. Emily's hands were shaking. David, I'm just the receptionist. No, David said gently. You're the person who saved this deal. Come on. He led her into the conference room. All eyes turned to her, including Richard's, which were unreadable. Akiko Yamamoto stood unbowed slightly. Emily returned the bow at precisely the same depth, a sign of equal respect. For Yuki's translation, Akiko spoke. David-san tells me that you organized today's meeting preparations. The attention to detail is impressive. In Japan, we say omotenashi, hospitality from the heart. You demonstrated that today. Thank you, Emily said quietly. It's an honor to help welcome you to Henderson Manufacturing. Hiroshi Yamamoto spoke then, his voice deep and measured. Yuki translated. Mr. Yamamoto said that a company is known by how it treats all of its people, not just its leaders. He says that he can see that Henderson Manufacturing has people who care deeply about excellence at every level. Emily felt emotion tighten her throat. After 7 years of being invisible, she was being acknowledged by strangers who'd known her for less than 2 hours. The meeting continued, and Emily was invited to stay. She sat in the back, not as a participant, but as an observer. She watched as David presented the proposal, as Richard tried to regain control of the narrative, as the Yamamoto team asked detailed technical questions that the Henderson team answered with varying degrees of success. At 5 p.m., Hiroshi Yamamoto stood. Everyone in the room stood with him. Through Yuki, he said, "We will consider your proposal carefully. We will contact you with our decision within a week." It was the traditional Japanese way. Never commit immediately. Never reveal your hand. The meeting ended with bows, handshakes, and polite escort back to the lobby. When the Yamamoto delegation's car pulled away from the curb, David let out a long breath. "I think that went well," he said cautiously. Richard said nothing. He turned and walked back to the elevator without a word to anyone. Emily stood in the lobby, her old lobby, and felt the adrenaline drain from her body, leaving her exhausted. She'd done it. She'd saved the meeting. And now she was unemployed with no plan and no prospects. David squeezed her shoulder. "Thank you, truly. I'll talk to Richard about reinstating you. What he did was wrong." "Don't bother," Emily said tiredly. "I don't want to work for someone who thinks so little of me. I'll find something else." She left Henderson Manufacturing for the second time that day, this time with no illusions about coming back.
We all did. Listen, about your situation, I've been talking to HR and to Richard. I think we can work something out, get you reinstated, maybe even with a raise on a promotion. I know it's not enough to make up for what happened, but... David? Emily interrupted gently. I appreciate that. Really, I do. But I don't need it. Akiko Yamamoto just offered me a position with their company, International Cultural Liaison. I'm taking it. There was silence on the other end. Then David laughed, a real delighted laugh. Of course she did. Emily, that's fantastic. You deserve it. When do you start? 1 month. I'll be based in Chicago. Chicago? That's quite a change from here. David's voice became more serious. Emily, I know I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I've regretted that every day this week. I'm genuinely happy that you're getting this opportunity, but I'm also sorry that it took something this extreme for me to recognize what you contributed here. Thank you for saying that, Emily said.
It means more than you know. They talked for a few more minutes, exchanging well wishes and promises to stay in touch. When Emily hung up, she felt lighter than she had in years. She was leaving Henderson Manufacturing behind, not in defeat, but in triumph. But there was one more conversation she needed to have. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after her firing, Emily walked back into Henderson Manufacturing. She signed in at the security desk, now manned by a temp who looked overwhelmed, and took the elevator to the 5th floor. Marcus, Richard's assistant, looked shocked to see her. "Emily? What are you doing here?" "I need 5 minutes with Richard. Is he available?" "I don't think that's a good idea." "I'm not here to cause problems, Marcus. I'm here to have a professional conversation. 5 minutes." Marcus disappeared into Richard's office. Emily could hear the murmur of voices. Then Marcus returned, and with visible reluctance, gestured for her to enter. Richard Henderson sat behind his massive desk, his expression carefully neutral. The office was exactly as Emily remembered from the one time she'd been inside it years ago. Mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, awards and photos documenting 3 generations of Henderson's success. "Miss Carter," Richard said coolly, "I'm surprised to see you back here. I won't take much of your time. I wanted you to hear something directly from me before you hear it through other channels. Yamamoto Industrial has offered me a position as their international cultural liaison. I've accepted. I start in 3 weeks. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I see. Congratulations." "Thank you." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I also wanted to tell you that I don't harbor any ill will toward you or this company. What happened was unfortunate, but it led me to an opportunity I never would have found otherwise. So in a strange way, I'm grateful." "That's very gracious of you." Richard's tone was still formal, but less cold than before. "I'm not trying to be gracious," Emily said honestly. "I'm trying to be honest. For 7 years, I worked at that desk downstairs, and I was invisible to you, to most people here. I don't blame you for that. It's how corporate hierarchies work. But Mr. Henderson, I want you to understand something. The people you don't see are often the ones holding everything together. I knew more about this company's daily operations than most of your VPs. I prevented problems you never knew existed. I made your life easier in 1,000 small ways that you never noticed." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Are you asking for an apology?" "No," Emily said firmly. "I'm giving you advice, free advice, from someone who has nothing to gain from it. Pay attention to the people who seem invisible. The receptionist who's there before you arrive and after you leave, the janitor who notices when a machine is making a strange sound, the assistant who remembers details you forget. These people see things that executives miss. And if you keep treating them like furniture, you'll keep missing opportunities and creating problems you don't need." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Also, you should know that Akiko Yamamoto included a clause in your contract requiring a review of HR practices. She was disturbed by how you treated me. I didn't ask her to do that. In fact, I tried to talk her out of it. But she insisted. So you might want to think about that." Richard stood abruptly. "Miss Carter," she continued calmly, "I spent 7 years resenting this place, resenting you, feeling like I was wasting my life. But the truth is, those 7 years taught me everything I need to succeed in my new role. I learned how to read people, how to anticipate needs, how to manage complex logistics, how to stay calm in chaos. So thank you, Mr. Henderson. You gave me more than you realized, even if you didn't mean to." Now she turned fully toward the door. "I hope the Yamamoto contract brings Henderson Manufacturing everything David promised it would. You have good people here who deserve that success." "Wait, Richard's voice stopped her. She turned back. He was standing now, his hands on his desk, and for the first time in 7 years, he was looking at her. Really looking at her. "I was wrong about you, about how I spoke to you. I don't apologize often, Miss Carter, because I rarely make mistakes, but I made one with you. It wasn't a good apology. It was stiff, uncomfortable, and still somehow managed to be arrogant. But it was an apology, and coming from Richard Henderson, that was significant." "I accept," Emily said simply. "Goodbye, Mr. Henderson." She walked out of his office, past Marcus's desk, and back to the elevator. As the doors closed, she felt a chapter of her life closing with them. She was done with Henderson Manufacturing, done with being invisible, done with accepting less than she deserved. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Emily gave notice on her apartment, started packing, and began the online orientation process for Yamamoto Industrial. Akiko emailed her regularly with information about the Chicago office, her future colleagues, and the training program she'd go through in Tokyo during her second month. David Park took her to lunch on her last day in town. They met at a small restaurant near Henderson Manufacturing, and he presented her with a gift, a beautiful leather portfolio with her initials embossed on it. "For your new career," he said with a smile. "You're going to do amazing things, Emily." "I hope so." "And David, thank you for being one of the good ones, for seeing me when others didn't." "I didn't see you well enough or soon enough," David said with regret. "But I'll do better going forward." Richard has actually implemented some of the changes Yamamoto's HR clause required. We're creating new channels for employee feedback, better recognition programs. It's not revolutionary, but it's something. "That's good," Emily said sincerely. "This company needs that." They parted with promises to stay in touch, and Emily believed they actually would. David Park was the kind of person who kept his word. On her last evening in town, Emily visited her mother. She'd been dreading this conversation, telling her mother she was moving to Chicago, starting a new career, leaping into the unknown. But her mother surprised her. "It's about time," she said, squeezing Emily's hand. "I've watched you slowly disappear for 7 years in that job. You were becoming invisible even to yourself. This is good, honey. This is right." Emily cried then, releasing years of frustration and disappointment and fear. Her mother held her and told her that sometimes the worst things that happen to us open doors we never knew existed. Emily spent the next 3 days in a fog. She updated her resume, reached out to her limited professional network, and tried not to think about the 7 years she'd invested in a company that had discarded her in seconds. Her mother asked what was wrong. Emily said she was thinking about a career change, which was technically true. On Friday morning, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Carter, this is Akiko Yamamoto." Emily sat up straight on her couch, suddenly wide awake. "Miss Yamamoto, hello. How can I help you?" "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I got your number from Mr. Park. I wanted to speak with you about something important." There was a pause. "Are you still employed at Henderson Manufacturing?" Emily hesitated. "No, ma'am. I left the company this week." "I see." Another pause. "Miss Carter, my father and I were very impressed with you. The way you prepared for our meeting, your understanding of our business culture, your attention to detail, these are rare qualities. We are prepared to move forward with Henderson Manufacturing, but I have a concern." Emily's chest tightened. "What kind of concern?" "When we were leaving the building on Tuesday, I went back to retrieve something I'd forgotten. I overheard 2 employees talking. They mentioned that you were fired that morning, that you had been fired for trying to warn the company about our meeting, that everything we experienced that day, The excellent preparation was done by someone who no longer worked there. Akiko's voice was carefully neutral. Is this true? Emily closed her eyes. Yes, ma'am, it's true. I see. Miss Carter, in Japanese business, we have a concept called kaizen, continuous improvement. But improvement requires recognizing value wherever it exists, not just where we expect to find it. A company that fires someone for trying to help is not a company that practices kaizen. It is a company with a leadership problem. I understand your concern, Emily said carefully, but I can assure you that Henderson Manufacturing has excellent people. David Park is one of the most principled men I've ever worked with. The factory workers take pride in their work. The quality control team is meticulous. What happened to me was unfortunate, but it doesn't reflect on the company's ability to deliver. You are defending a company that treated you poorly, Akiko observed. Why? Because the people there, most of them, deserve this contract. They've worked hard for it. They have families depending on them. I don't want my situation to cost them an opportunity. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Akiko spoke again, her voice was warmer. My father was right about you. You have integrity. That is even more rare than attention to detail. She paused. Miss Carter, we are moving forward with the Henderson contract, but I want to propose something additional. Yamamoto Industrial is expanding our North American presence. We need someone to serve as our cultural liaison, someone who understands both American business practices and Japanese expectations, someone who is detail-oriented, diplomatic, and has integrity. Would you be interested in such a position? Emily's mind reeled. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an interview, she corrected gently. If you are interested, come to our hotel this afternoon at 2 p.m. We leave for Tokyo tomorrow morning, but I would like to discuss this before we go. I'll be there. Thank you. Thank you so much. When the call ended, Emily sat on her couch in stunned silence. Then she laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that turned into tears of relief. In the span of 3 days, she'd gone from fired and hopeless to potentially working for an international corporation. At 1:45, Emily arrived at the Grand Harbor Hotel where the Yamamoto delegation was staying. She'd dressed in her best interview suit, 5 years old but still professional. Akiko met her in the lobby and led her to a private meeting room. For the next hour, they talked. Akiko explained the position. Emily would be based in the new Yamamoto North American office opening in Chicago, but she'd travel frequently to Japan and to Yamamoto's various U.S. partner sites. Her job would be to facilitate communication, ensure cultural protocols were followed, identify potential misunderstandings before they became problems, and generally serve as a bridge between two business cultures. The salary was almost 3 times what she'd made at Henderson Manufacturing. The benefits included housing assistance, language lessons, and international travel. Why me? Emily finally asked. You must have access to people with far more experience, with business degrees, with international credentials. We have many employees with credentials, but credentials can be taught. Character cannot. You demonstrated character when no one was watching, when you had every reason to walk away, when helping would cost you personally. That is the quality we need most. Emily thought about it. Chicago. A new city, a new career, a chance to start completely over, away from Henderson Manufacturing and the memories of feeling invisible. I'm very interested, she said. But I need to ask, is this offer contingent on the Henderson deal going through? No, Akiko said firmly. This offer is for you, regardless of what happens with Henderson. Though I will tell you confidentially that my father has decided to move forward with them. David Park impressed us, and the facility tour showed excellent capabilities. But Miss Carter, Akiko leaned forward slightly, when we sign that contract, I will be including a clause that requires Henderson Manufacturing to conduct a review of their human resource practices, particularly regarding treatment of non-executive staff. Not because I want to punish them, but because good companies sometimes need outside perspective to see their blind spots. Emily felt a warm satisfaction at that. Not revenge, exactly, but justice, acknowledgement. When would you need me to start? She asked. We need 3 weeks to finalize the office space in Chicago and complete the legal paperwork. Could you start in 1 month? Emily thought about her mother, her tiny apartment, her lack of savings. None of it mattered compared to this opportunity. Yes, absolutely, yes. They shook hands and Akiko smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Welcome to Yamamoto Industrial, Emily-san. Emily left the hotel walking on air. She called David Park from her car, wanting to share the news with someone who would understand what it meant. Emily, I've been trying to reach you, David said before she could speak. We got the Yamamoto contract. They signed this morning. It's incredible. This is going to transform the company. That's wonderful, David. Congratulations. You earned it.
6 months later, Emily stood in the Chicago office of Yamamoto Industrial, reviewing the quarterly report with a sense of satisfaction. The North American division was exceeding expectations. The Henderson Manufacturing Partnership had expanded beyond the initial automotive contract into 2 additional product lines. And Emily had successfully facilitated partnerships with 3 other American manufacturers. Each deal running smoothly because she'd learned to bridge the cultural and communication gaps that typically caused problems. She'd also changed. The woman who'd sat invisible at a reception desk for 7 years was gone. In her place was a confident professional who spoke up in meetings, who trusted her own judgment, who understood her value. Emily had started intensive Japanese language lessons and could now conduct basic business conversations without an interpreter. She had traveled to Tokyo twice, to Detroit, to San Francisco, and back to visit the Henderson facility to oversee the expansion of their contract. That last visit had been interesting. Richard Henderson had been civil, almost respectful. The lobby now had a new receptionist, a young man named Carlos who seemed happy and engaged. David Park had been promoted to VP of Operations, and he'd implemented several of Emily's suggestions about improving communication channels across all levels of the company. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Akiko called her into her office with an unusual request. Emily-san, we have a situation that requires your particular expertise. Akiko began, her expression serious. Henderson Manufacturing is facing a crisis. Emily's stomach dropped. What kind of crisis? A major quality control issue. One of their largest clients, not us, but a German automotive company, has found defects in a shipment of 50,000 units. The client is threatening to cancel their contract and sue for damages. It could bankrupt Henderson Manufacturing. Emily's felt her chest tighten. Despite everything, she didn't want to see the company fail. Too many good people worked there. What does this have to do with us? David Park called me directly. He says they've traced the problem to a change in their production process that was implemented 4 months ago. But here's what's interesting. He says there are emails from 3 different employees warning about potential issues with the new process. These emails were sent to management and were ignored. Emily closed her eyes. The same pattern. People trying to help and being dismissed. David asked if you would be willing to come to Henderson as a consultant. He believes you have the skill set to help them understand what went wrong with their internal communication systems. He also believes that your outsider perspective might help Richard Henderson finally understand the cultural problems in his company. Why would I help Richard Henderson? Emily asked, the question coming out more sharply than she intended. Because it's not about Richard Henderson, Akiko said gently. It's about the 300 people who work at that factory. It's about David Park, who stood by you in his own way. And honestly, Emily-san, it's about you. This is a chance to show that company exactly what they lost, not in anger or revenge, but in competence and professionalism.
Emily thought about it. The old Emily, the invisible one, would have refused out of fear and hurt, but she wasn't that person anymore. How long would the consulting engagement be? 2 weeks, maybe 3. We would loan you to them temporarily, but you'd remain a Yamamoto employee. Consider it part of our partnership support. All right, I'll do it. 3 days later, Emily walked back into Henderson Manufacturing for the 3rd time in 6 months. But this time, she wasn't arriving as a fired receptionist or even as a former employee. She was arriving as an external consultant representing Yamamoto Industrial, one of their most important clients. Carlos, the new receptionist, greeted her warmly and directed her to conference room A, the same room where she'd helped prepare for the Yamamoto meeting. The same room where Akiko Yamamoto acknowledged her worth when her own employer wouldn't. David Park met her there looking exhausted and grateful. "Emily, thank you for coming. This situation is bad, really bad." "Tell me everything," she said, settling into a chair and opening her laptop. For the next hour, David walked her through the crisis. The German client, Schneider Automotive, had received a shipment of brake housing components that were failing stress tests. The defect rate was only 2%, but in automotive safety parts, even 0.1% was unacceptable. Schneider was demanding a complete recall, a refund of $1.2 million, and threatening legal action for another $3 million in damages related to their production delays. The defects had been traced to a new production process that was implemented to increase efficiency and reduce costs. But 3 separate employees, a quality control inspector Maria Santos, a senior machine operator James Chen, and a production floor supervisor Robert Williams, had sent emails warning that the new process was being rushed and might compromise quality standards. Who did they send the emails to? Emily asked. To production management, VP level. And what happened? David grimaced. They were told that upper management had approved the new process and their concerns were noted but overruled by engineering assessments. Were there engineering assessments? Yes, but they were theoretical, based on simulations, not actual production runs with quality testing. Emily made notes, her mind already working through the problem. This isn't just a quality control failure, David. This is a systems failure, a culture failure. Let me talk to those 3 employees who sent the warnings. Over the next 3 days, Emily interviewed the quality control inspector Maria Santos, the machine operator James Chen, and the production floor supervisor Robert Williams. What she found was both predictable and infuriating. Maria had noticed that the new process was producing parts that were within acceptable tolerances, but with greater variance. Some parts were perfect, others were borderline. She had tried to flag this as a statistical red flag, but was told she was being too cautious and resistant to change. James had felt something was wrong with how the machines responded to the new process settings. The sound was different, the vibration patterns were different, but he was told his gut feeling wasn't data and was dismissed. Robert had compiled both Maria and James' concerns along with his own observations and sent a detailed email to the VP of production, Mark Stevens. He'd requested a pause in the rollout for additional testing. Mark had replied with one sentence. The timeline has been set by executive leadership and will not change. Emily compiled all of this into a report. But she didn't stop there. She interviewed 20 more employees across different departments, asking them about communication, about how concerns were raised and addressed, about whether they felt heard by management.
The pattern was clear and damning. Henderson Manufacturing had a top-down culture where leadership made decisions and expected compliance, not collaboration. Employees who raised concerns were labeled as negative, resistant, or not team players. Over time, people had learned to stop speaking up because it never made a difference anyway. On day 8 of her consultation, Emily requested a meeting with the entire executive team, including Richard Henderson. David arranged it, and Emily spent the evening preparing her presentation. The next morning, she walked into that boardroom one more time. Richard sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The VPs of production, sales, finance, and operations surrounded him. David Park sat to Emily's right, supportive as always.
Thank you for meeting with me, Emily began, her voice steady and professional. I've spent the past week investigating the root cause of the Schneider automotive crisis. I've reviewed the technical failure, the timeline of events, and most importantly, I've interviewed your employees. What I'm about to tell you won't be easy to hear, but it's necessary. She pulled up her first slide. The technical failure, the defective brake housings, is real, but it's a symptom, not the disease. The disease is a cultural problem that has been growing in this company for years, and it's costing you money, opportunities, and good employees. Richard leaned forward slightly. Go on. Emily clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline. 4 months ago, the decision was made to implement a new production process to increase efficiency. That decision was made by executive leadership without input from the people who actually run the machines and inspect the parts. 3 employees raised concerns. All 3 were dismissed or ignored. 2 weeks ago, Schneider Automotive discovered the defects. You're now facing potential bankruptcy. She paused, letting that sink in. But here's what you don't know. Over the past 3 years, Henderson Manufacturing has lost 8 experienced employees from production and quality control. I contacted 6 of them. All 6 said they left because they felt their expertise was undervalued and their concerns were ignored. You're hemorrhaging institutional knowledge because you've created a culture where only executive opinions matter. Mark Stevens, the VP of production, shifted uncomfortably. We have processes for employee feedback. You have processes that exist on paper but not in practice. When was the last time an employee concern actually changed an executive decision? When was the last time someone from the factory floor was invited to a strategic planning meeting? Silence. Emily clicked to another slide. I've compiled recommendations. Some are short-term fixes for the Schneider automotive crisis. Others are long-term cultural changes. But I want to be clear about something first. She looked directly at Richard. Mr. Henderson, 6 months ago, you fired me for trying to prevent a crisis. Now you're facing a much bigger crisis that could have been prevented if you'd listened to your employees. I'm not saying this to embarrass you. I'm saying it because you need to understand that this pattern will keep repeating until you change how this company operates. Richard's face was carefully neutral, but Emily could see the tension in his shoulders. What are your recommendations? For the next hour, Emily walked him through her findings. The short-term recommendations focused on damage control with Schneider, a complete quality audit, a replacement of all suspect parts, and a transparent communication about what went wrong and how it was being fixed. She'd already drafted the communication and negotiated preliminary terms with Schneider's team, pending Henderson's approval. The long-term recommendations were more revolutionary. She proposed creating a cross-functional quality council that included factory floor employees alongside management. She recommended implementing a formal process where employee concerns triggered automatic review before implementation of new processes. She suggested regular town halls where executives listened to employees without judgment or immediate rebuttal. Most controversially, she recommended that executive bonuses be partially tied to employee satisfaction and retention metrics, not just profit margins. You want to tie our compensation to satisfaction surveys? Mark Stevens looked incredulous. I want you to have skin in the game when it comes to culture. Right now, you're incentivized to cut costs and increase efficiency with no regard for the human cost. Maria Santos, your quality control inspector who tried to warn you, makes $52,000 a year. She was right and you were wrong, but she'll see no benefit from being right, and you'll see no consequence from being wrong unless we change the incentive structure. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice measured. Mr. Carter, you've given us a lot to think about. I'd like to review these recommendations with my team and get back to you. Of course, Emily said, gathering her materials. But Mr. Henderson, you don't have a lot of time. Schneider wants answers by the end of the week or they're filing suit. And your employees, the good ones, are watching to see if anything actually changes. If it doesn't, you'll lose more of them. Eventually, you'll lose the company. The meeting ended, and Emily left the building feeling drained but satisfied. She'd said what needed to be said. Whether they'd listen was up to them. That evening, David called her. The executive team met for 3 hours after you left. Richard wants to implement your recommendations. All of them. Emily felt a surge of surprise and hope. Really? Really? He's not happy about it, but even Richard can see the writing on the wall. We're meeting with Schneider next week, and we're using your proposed framework for the Quality Council. Emily, you might have just saved this company. David, I didn't do this for the company. I did it for people like Maria and James and Robert, people who deserve to be heard. I know, David said warmly. That's why it worked.
3 months later, Emily received an unexpected email from Richard Henderson. The subject line read simply, "Update and request." She opened it with curiosity. "Ms. Carter, I wanted to update you on the progress since your consultation. The Schneider situation has been resolved. They've renewed their contract with additional quality provisions, but they're staying with us. The Quality Council you proposed is meeting weekly, and we've already identified and prevented 2 potential issues before they became problems. More significantly, employee retention has improved. 3 people who had submitted resignations withdrew them after seeing the changes being implemented. Morale surveys show measurable improvement. I'm writing because I have a request. Henderson Manufacturing is stable now, but we need to continue evolving. David Park has suggested creating a new executive position, VP of Organizational Excellence. The role would oversee quality, employee development, and internal communication. It would report directly to me and have a seat on the executive board. I would like to offer you this position. I know I have no right to expect you to even consider this. You have an excellent career with Yamamoto Industrial. But I believe you could do something important here, not just for Henderson Manufacturing, but as proof that companies can change when they're willing to listen. The decision is yours, but I hope you'll at least think about it. Regards, Richard Henderson." Emily stared at the email for a long time. VP of Organizational Excellence, an executive position, the opportunity to rebuild a company's culture from the inside. It was tempting, more tempting than she wanted to admit. She called Akiko to discuss it. "What do you want to do?" Akiko asked simply. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "Part of me wants to prove that I could do it. Part of me feels like I'd be going backward." "Would it be backward?" Akiko challenged gently. "You came to Yamamoto as someone escaping a bad situation. If you return to Henderson, you'd be going as someone with the power to change that situation. That's not backward, Emily-san. That's full circle." "What about my role here? I don't want to abandon Yamamoto after everything you've done for me." "You're not abandoning us. You're graduating." Akiko's voice was warm. "Emily-san, I hired you because I saw potential that others missed. You've exceeded every expectation. If you want to take this challenge, Yamamoto will support you. We might even benefit. Having a strong advocate in a partner company serves us well." Emily thought about it for 2 more days. She thought about Maria Santos and James Chen and Robert Williams. Good people who deserved a leader who would listen to them. She thought about the 300 employees at Henderson Manufacturing who'd been working in a system that didn't value them. She thought about David Park, who'd tried his best but couldn't change the culture alone. And yes, she thought about Richard Henderson. Not because she liked him, but because she'd seen something in him during her consultation. A capacity for growth, however uncomfortable it made him. If he was genuinely willing to change, she wanted to be part of that transformation. She sent her reply. "Mr. Henderson, I'll accept your offer on 3 conditions. First, I want full authority over HR policies and internal communication systems with no executive override.
Second, I want to guarantee that employee concerns brought to my attention will be addressed without retaliation. Third, I want a seat on the executive board from day one, not after I've proven myself. If you can agree to these terms, I'll start in 6 weeks. His response came within an hour. Agreed on all 3 conditions. Welcome back to Henderson Manufacturing, Ms. Carter. Emily's last day at Yamamoto Industrial was bittersweet. Akiko presented her with a beautiful Japanese woodblock print as a farewell gift. "For your new office," she said, "a reminder that growth often comes from difficult seasons." "I'll never forget what you did for me," Emily said, embracing her mentor. "You saw me when I was invisible." "You were never invisible, Emily-san. You were just in the wrong place. Now you're going to the right place. Not the place you left, but the place you've earned." On her first day as VP of Organizational Excellence at Henderson Manufacturing, Emily walked through the front door with her head high. Carlos greeted her enthusiastically from the reception desk. "Ms. Carter, congratulations on the promotion." "Thank you, Carlos. And Carlos, I want you to know that your role here is important. If you see something wrong, if you have ideas for improvement, if you need help, you come directly to me. No red tape, no bureaucracy. You matter." Carlos looked surprised and pleased. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot." Emily took the elevator to the 5th floor. Her office was next to David Park's, with windows overlooking the factory floor. Her nameplate on the door read, "Emily Carter, VP Organizational Excellence." She spent her first week meeting with every department, every level of employee. She listened more than she talked. She took notes on concerns, ideas, complaints, and hopes. She ate lunch in the cafeteria with machine operators and quality inspectors. She joined the morning production meeting on the factory floor at 6 a.m. to understand their challenges. On Friday of her first week, she held her first town hall. She had expected maybe 50 people to show up. Over 200 came, more than 2/3 of the company. "Thank you all for coming," Emily began, standing on a small platform that had been set up in the main factory floor. "Most of you know my story. I sat at the reception desk for 7 years. I was fired for trying to help, and now I'm back as an executive. It's a strange journey, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do know one thing. This company has incredible people doing incredible work, and you deserve leadership that recognizes that." She clicked to her first slide. "Here's what I've learned in my first week. You have 47 ideas for improving efficiency that haven't been heard. You have concerns about safety equipment in Building C that haven't been addressed for 6 months. You have suggestions for better quality control processes that could save us money and improve our products. All of this valuable information has been sitting untapped because we haven't had the right systems to capture it and act on it." Emily outlined her plan. The Quality Council was being expanded to include representatives from every department elected by their peers. A new digital platform was being implemented where any employee could submit concerns or ideas with guaranteed response in 48 hours. Monthly meetings where executives would report to employees, not just the other way around, and a recognition program that celebrated not just results, but integrity, innovation, and collaboration.
But here's the most important thing, Emily continued. I can't do this alone. I need you to speak up. I need you to bring me the hard truths, the uncomfortable observations, the things that executives don't want to hear. And I promise you this, I will listen, I will act, and I will protect you from retaliation. Your job is not to make executives comfortable. Your job is to make this company excellent. The applause started slowly, then grew. These were people who'd been waiting years to be heard. After the town hall, Richard Henderson appeared at Emily's office door. That was quite a speech. It was the truth, Emily said simply.
Richard walked in and sat across from her desk. You know, when I fired you, I thought I was making a personnel decision, removing someone who didn't understand boundaries. It took me months to realize I'd made the worst decision of my career. Emily waited, not making it easy for him. I've been running this company for 15 years. My father ran it for 30 before that. We always believed that leadership meant having all the answers, making the tough calls, being strong enough to ignore the noise and stay the course. It never occurred to me that strength could mean listening, that leadership could mean admitting you're wrong. And now, Emily asked, now I'm learning. I'm not good at this, Emily. I'm not naturally collaborative or patient or humble, but I'm trying. And I need you to keep pushing me even when it makes me uncomfortable, especially when it makes me uncomfortable. It wasn't a perfect apology or a complete transformation. Richard Henderson would probably always be difficult, arrogant, and uncomfortable with vulnerability, but he was trying to change, and that counted for something. I can do that, Emily said. But Richard, this isn't about you and me. This is about creating something bigger than both of us. A company where people at every level feel valued, heard, and empowered to do their best work. That's the goal. Agreed, Richard said, standing. He extended his hand. To the goal, then. Emily shook his hand. To the goal.
1 year later, Emily stood at a podium in the Henderson manufacturing cafeteria, which had been transformed for a special occasion. The company was celebrating its best year in a decade. Record profits, 0 major quality incidents, employee retention at a 10-year high, and recognition from industry publications as an emerging leader in manufacturing excellence. But Emily wasn't here to talk about profits. When I sat at the reception desk 7 years ago, she began, looking out at the crowd of employees, executives, and special guests, I felt invisible. I felt like my work didn't matter, like I didn't matter. I wasn't unique in that feeling. Many of you have felt the same way at different points in your careers. You felt overlooked, undervalued, dismissed. She paused, letting that truth settle. Today, I want to tell you about the people who changed this company. Not the executives, though they deserve credit for being willing to change. I want to tell you about Maria Santos, whose attention to detail and persistence saved us from a devastating lawsuit. About James Chen, whose 40 years of experience and intuition have prevented countless problems. About Robert Williams, who had the courage to keep speaking up even when no one seemed to listen. About Carlos Mendoza, our receptionist, who redesigned our visitor management system and made us more efficient and secure. Emily clicked to a slide showing photos of dozens of employees. These are the people who make Henderson Manufacturing excellent, not because they have fancy titles or advanced degrees, but because they show up every day. They care about their work, and they're willing to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. She looked directly at Richard Henderson, who sat in the front row. A year ago, this company was facing a crisis, not just a financial crisis, but a crisis of culture and values. We had to make a choice: keep doing things the way we'd always done them, or have the courage to change. Mr. Henderson, you chose change. That wasn't easy for you, and I know it still isn't easy, but that choice saved this company. Richard nodded slightly, acknowledging the recognition. But here's what I've learned this year, Emily continued, her voice becoming more passionate. Excellence isn't about perfection. It's not about never making mistakes or always having the right answers. Excellence is about being willing to listen, to learn, to admit when you're wrong, and to value people regardless of their position on the organizational chart. She clicked to her final slide, which showed just 2 words: everyone matters. This is our company's new core value. Not customers first, or profit maximization, or innovation above all. Just everyone matters. The receptionist and the CEO, the janitor and the VP, the newest hire and the most experienced veteran. Everyone has value. Everyone has something to contribute. Everyone deserves to be heard. Emily's voice softened. I know how it feels to be invisible, to work hard and never be acknowledged, to have ideas and never be asked, to be dismissed simply because of your job title. It's demoralizing, it's exhausting, and it wastes so much human potential. She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as she could. So here's my challenge to all of us, and to myself. Don't wait for a crisis to see people. Don't wait until someone's leaving to appreciate them. Don't wait until you need them to value them. See people now. Listen to them now. Recognize their contributions now. Emily stepped back from the podium, then forward again for one final thought. I'm standing here today, not because I'm smarter or more talented than anyone else. I'm here because someone, Akiko Yamamoto, saw me when others didn't. She gave me a chance when I'd been thrown away. And that one act of recognition changed my entire life. She turned to where Akiko sat as a special guest. Thank you for seeing me, Akiko-san. I hope I'm paying that gift forward. Akiko bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement, a smile on her face. So here's my question for all of us, and to myself. Who are we not seeing? Who have we made invisible through our indifference or our assumptions? What potential are we wasting because we've decided someone isn't important enough to listen to? He let the questions hang in the air. Everyone matters. That's not just a corporate value, it's a human truth. And when we embrace it, really embrace it, amazing things happen. Companies become stronger. Communities become healthier. People become their best selves. Emily smiled. Thank you all for giving me the chance to be part of this transformation. And thank you for being willing to transform yourselves. This is just the beginning. The applause was thunderous. People stood, not because it was expected, but because they felt it. This was their company now, in a way it had never been before. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Maria Santos approached Emily. Thank you, she said simply, for making it safe to speak up, for showing us that our voices matter. No, Maria, Emily replied warmly. Thank you for never giving up. You saved this company by refusing to be silent, even when it was hard. Later, Richard Henderson found Emily by the windows overlooking the factory floor. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the workers below. I'm sorry, Richard said quietly. Not just for firing you, though that was unconscionable. I'm sorry for all the times I walked past you without seeing you, for treating you like you were invisible, for making you feel like you didn't matter. It was the apology Emily needed a year ago. Now it felt like closure. I forgive you, Richard, and I appreciate you saying it. You've changed this company, Richard said. But more than that, you've changed me. I'm a better leader because you forced me to be. I'm a better person because you showed me what I was missing. Emily turned to look at him. You know what the funny thing is? I spent 7 years resenting you, resenting this place. Now I'm grateful for all of it. The invisibility taught me to see others. The dismissal taught me the importance of recognition. The firing forced me to discover my own worth. I wouldn't change any of it. That's remarkably gracious, Richard observed. It's not grace, Emily corrected. It's perspective. We're all works in progress, Richard. We all have blind spots. We all hurt people without meaning to. The question isn't whether we'll make mistakes, it's whether we'll learn from them. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I'm still learning. Good, Emily said with a slight smile. The day you stop learning is the day you stop growing. They stood together, executive to executive now, watching the company they were building together. A company where people mattered, where voices were heard, where excellence came from recognizing the potential in everyone. Emily thought about the journey that had brought her here, from invisible receptionist to fired employee to corporate consultant to VP. It had been painful, humiliating, terrifying, and ultimately transformative. She learned that worth doesn't come from titles or recognition. It comes from integrity, from caring about your work, from refusing to let others define your value. But she'd also learned that recognition matters, that being seen, truly seen, can change someone's life. That leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and listening to the answers, no matter who provides them. As the celebration continued around her, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. She spent years being invisible, and then she fought so hard to be seen. Now she understood that the real transformation wasn't about her visibility. It was about helping others become visible, about creating spaces where everyone could be seen, heard, and valued. Everyone matters. It was a simple truth, but living it changed everything. Emily Carter, once the invisible receptionist, had become the leader who made sure no one else would ever have to feel invisible again. And that was worth more than any title, any salary, any corporate recognition. That was excellence.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.